How's it going, guys? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video. I have the Ratmandu from Swamprat knives. This is probably about a medium-sized survival knife, I would say, about a 5-inch blade on this. And Swamprat knives, if you don't know, is a division of Bussy. It's sort of their production line, okay? So it's a little more affordable than the Bussy knives that all of us like to drool over. These ones, maybe you can actually buy and own. Okay, so nice to have that option anyway, and you're still getting, you know, the Bussy heat treat. You're still getting an extremely high level of fit and finish and of quality and certainly of durability. I would really call this knife, I think the word that best describes it is stout. It's just thick and heavy and strong. Okay, so if that's the kind of knife you're looking for, that's the kind of knife you enjoy using, look no further. This is an extremely well-built, maybe even overbuilt fixed blade survival knife. Okay, so let's get into exactly what that size and weight is. This knife is 10.5 inches overall. The blade length is 5 3/8 with the cutting edge. You know, you've got this flat portion and the choil here, and so if you measure from the actual grind, you get 4 3/4 inches. You do also have 5 inches of cutting edge, so that's kind of how the numbers work out on this. All of that weighs in at around 11 ounces, okay? It might be just a little under that, but it's gonna be in that ballpark. And of course, one thing you should point out, that I should point out right at the beginning, is if you buy one of these from Swamprat knives, they don't come with a sheath. One of the things you'll have to kind of include or add into your budget for costing is getting an aftermarket Kydex sheath. Now, these are very popular knives, so lots and lots of people make these sheaths and do a really good job of it, okay? So it's not a challenge, it's just something to kind of be aware of. Now, the blade on this, actually before I get into the blade, let me do a couple of size comparisons. So I pointed out that, you know, basically I'm gonna call this a 5-inch blade. It's actually 4 3/4 from, if you start measuring from the grind here, but for all intents and purposes, it's a 5-inch blade. You do have that choil. Now, let me go ahead and do a couple of comparisons so that you can see some other blades. You can see kind of where this lands on the scale. Especially, let me show you for sort of comparison. And I probably will bring this knife back a couple of other times. This is the SE6. And there's the Swamprat, the Ratmandu right beside it. You can see that the 6 is considerably bigger, okay, you know, over an inch larger, and yet these weigh almost exactly the same. So that should tell you just how much steel is in there. And when I talk about this being a 5-inch blade, you can kind of see now where the SE6 does have a good inch on the Ratmandu, okay? Now I'll come back and talk about, I did do a lot of chopping and a lot of cutting and a lot of batoning with both of these knives at the same time. You know, I use one and use the other and use one and use the other. So I will make some comparisons as we go along, even though this will not be primarily a comparison video. One more size comparison, just because this is a knife probably many of you are familiar with. This is the Becker BK9, and there is the Ratmandu beside the BK9. So again, you can see it's a fairly small knife when it comes to fixed blade survival knives, right? Now, let's come back to the knife itself and talk about a few things, starting off with the blade. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. That's probably, I don't know, let's see. I'll come out of frame here and see if it works better. A little bit more. There we go. Okay, so there's that blade. You can see that I've got quite a bit of use on it. The black coating on here, they call it like a wrinkle coating or something, and they talk about it as the design of the coating is to reduce friction when you're batoning or when you're cutting something, and they say, you know, because of the wrinkle pattern, there's less surface area in contact with whatever substrate you're cutting through at any given time. All right, you know, I'm not, probably, you know, most coated knives are going to perform in a similar way, and the coating is going to have an impact on how well it slices. Now, with this knife, it's probably not the biggest factor, because to start off, I'm going to say this, the edge geometry on this is not good, okay? It's so thick that, you know, this knife with the factory edge would not cut paper no matter how sharp you got it. You could get it very, very sharp, and it wouldn't cut paper because it's just too thick. It would just rip. So I reprofiled this to a 40-degree inclusive, and it's much better now, but it's still thicker than I like, okay? Now, let me talk about some of the uses of this knife. When you're cutting with this, when you're batoning, number one, you have all the confidence in the world, but it's actually so thick that a lot of material you're batoning splits in half before you even get the whole knife, you know, cut into the material. So it batons really, really well. However, a knife of this size especially, and really any knife, I want it to do more than just baton. In fact, that's the last thing I want it to do. Generally, I have better tools for that. Not that I always have them with me, and I think batoning is a legitimate use for a knife. I'm not one of those guys who says you can never do it. But you know, I don't want a knife primarily designed for that. I want a knife primarily designed for cutting that will also baton if needed. All right, and that's where this one falls down a little bit. It is not a very good slicer. You know, you're not going to be doing a lot of food prep with this. You're not going to be doing a lot of fine cutting tasks with this. It's just too thick for a lot of those things, okay? Now, if this is, again, if your main goal with this is to have one tool, you know, to survive a combat environment or survive a, you know, you're lost in the woods or your car breaks down by the side of the road type of situation, you know, yeah, that's a different story, and this is probably going to serve you fairly well. All right. By the way, for bushcraft tasks, I was able to, you know, get this down, you know, baton down to some pretty fine material, and then still was able to carve out some, you know, some feather sticks and do some, you know, just some lighter cutting to see how it held up. And it will do those slicing tasks. It just doesn't do them super, super well. Okay. You just have to be a little more careful with how you move the blade and what angle you get it at, where something like the Essie is a lot more forgiving because of the thinner grind, okay? Oh, by the way, this steel is also tough as nails. It's SR 101 steel, and it is ridiculously tough. It will just, yeah, there's just no, I've sharpened it, and I've batoned with it, and I've done all kinds of things. It is extremely tough, okay? Just, you're gonna have to take my word for it. This stuff it's actually quite hard to sharpen. It will take an edge, and it does hold the edge pretty well, but it's just really, really tough. Okay, so you kind of keep that in mind. It is, of course, full tang construction, G10 handle. Let me back out now as we talk about some other features of the knife. The G10 handle is very grippy and extremely comfortable. I really like the choil. You know, I'm probably partial to it. You know, it's not that you know, if a knife doesn't have a choil, it's no good to me. I still own and like knives that don't have one, but I do really, really like a finger choil, especially on a knife. This is a very, very heavy knife, and so having that option to choke up and get a little more control is actually really, really useful. All right, the pommel does, or I mean the tang does come through the handle, creating, you know, a metal area on the pommel there. There's a nice big lanyard hole, but it's also good for any kind of, you know, pounding task, whether you're pounding, you know, stakes into the ground, whether you're breaking out a window or something else. This knife is going to serve you really well for any kind of really hard use task. Anytime you're just pounding on something, prying on something, bashing something, this is a great tool for all that kind of stuff. All right, and really the only drawback to it is it's not great. It'll also cut, but it doesn't cut as well as I'd like to see it do. Okay. Let's see, sheath doesn't come with it. I'm not going to comment too much on the sheath, just because anyone who buys this is going to be finding your own sheath, so you're going to have to do your own due diligence. There are tons of them out there, and of course the nice thing is, if you buy a Kydex sheath, even if it's not perfect, you can reheat Kydex and try again. So, you know, let's say this knife had some rattle to it, which it really doesn't, but I thought, yeah, I don't know if I like the way this sheath is. Well, no problem, you can easily heat this Kydex back up, smush it down again, and hopefully, and not just hopefully, but likely, you'll be fine. You'll get a knife, you'll get the sheath into the configuration that you need it. Okay, so where does this knife fit? Now, who's going to want it? Why would you want it? Well, number one, it's one of the toughest knives that I have ever seen. Okay, so if you really like that kind of tool, if that's your mentality, then this is going to be a good option for you. Okay, if you need something about this size, you know, you could almost EDC this knife. It's a little big, but probably for certain situations you could make it work. And especially, you know, maybe you do a lot of hiking, or you're out in the woods as a guide or something else all the time, and you feel like something this size is just too much, you know, you're getting most of the capability and you're getting it in a smaller package. So it is nice for those people who want, you know, more of that 5-inch knife. Certainly there are a number of the other 5-inch blades that are quite overbuilt as well. And so this probably fits that genre quite well. And so if you're interested in like the BK2 and stuff like that, you'll probably be interested in this. So yeah. Where would I use this? Yeah, it'd be great. Great combat knife, great survival knife, great, you know, for a vehicle, you know, put in your trunk, put in the side of your door, put in, you know, your compartment where you keep your first aid kit and whatever else. You could use this as certainly a survival knife. I don't know so much about a hunting knife. The edge is pretty thick. I wouldn't want to go skinning a lot of animals with this. It just wouldn't excel at that. If you're a police officer, if you're in a military, you're in the military and you're in combat, all of those would be great options for this. All right, so there you go. Very, very stout knife. Probably the most overbuilt knife that I have had any experience with. I do like it just because of the quality, just because of that crazy overbuilt approach that they've taken with this knife. And so if that's the kind of knife you look for, you'll probably really like it. Now, if you're like me and you prefer a knife with a thinner edge geometry, something like the SE6 might be a little more appealing to you. Even the BK9, as hard as this is to believe, the BK9, even a knife that size, does have a thinner edge and is a better slicer than the Ratmandu. But everything else is going to be quite comparable, and with that size and weight, one thing I should say is you get a lot of chopping power for a very small knife just because it's so heavy. Okay, so there you go, guys. That's my take on this very overbuilt, very cool little fixed blade. I guess medium fixed blade. I keep wanting to call it little, and I guess that's because we had the BK9 out. Talk to you later.